Today's guest is a chef whose impact on American cuisine is hard to overstate. He's a James Beard Award winner, cookbook author, mentor to generations of chefs, and the chef widely credited with creating New World Cuisine, Chef Norman Van Aken. Now, I've been looking forward to this conversation forever, for a really long time. And in this first part of our interview, we're going to go all the way back to the beginning. We talk about growing up in Illinois, the jobs that came before cooking, the journey to Key West, the people who influenced his career, and how all of those experiences ultimately led to the creation of New World Cuisine. More importantly, we get to hear the stories behind the chef, the moments, the lessons, and the turning points that helped shape one of the most influential voices in modern American cooking. All that right now on the IncrEDIBLE Discourse. So, welcome to the show, Chef. Thank you for joining me again. Like I said, I've been waiting for this interview forever. It was so nice to catch up with you a couple of weeks ago on our long phone call. And just for context for listeners in the show, I worked with Chef Norman's son at Bay 13 over the summer and had a amazing time with him, specifically him and the relationship that we built, which then led me to his dad, Norman, who is somewhat of a hero of mine in the Florida food scene and nationwide food scene. And so I've had the opportunity to do a lot of research and a lot of reading in his books lately and kind of dive more into the man behind the pass. And so today I want to explore that from the words right from the horse.
All right.
So, Chef. All right. So maybe you want to tell us a little bit about yourself first. I know that's probably a lot, but that's okay with me.
I'll keep it condensed because they can go online and find out all kinds of things.
Yep.
I was born in Illinois in a small town just south of the Wisconsin border. Grew up in this idyllic landscape, trees and hills and a beautiful lake right close by. We could go swimming in the summer and ice skating in the winter. And my father was a car dealer, so there was not learning the restaurant life from him. My mother was a housekeeper until they were divorced, and then she went back to the business she loved, which was the restaurant business. And so I glimpsed the restaurant business, and if you will, as a kid, a young kid. But it was not at all like something in my thinking that I would be in the restaurant world. I was more inclined to follow something to do with writing. I was always a reader, and my imagination was set free in books. I love to climb the trees, and especially that there's a tree in my front yard that was a special tree, and I would go up there with a book and just read for a couple of hours, and then come down, and then come back to the life of getting ready for school or dinner or activities, being with the family. My mother and father, when they were together, brought us kids down. I have two sisters, one older, one younger, and an older brother, much older than me, so he was grown by that time. But he brought us down to Miami Beach for the Christmas break each year for a couple of years. And I think, Mark, that was what got me the bug for Florida, even as a tiny little kid, because I was in my mother's arms the first time we came to vacation for those magical 10 or 12 days in the winter break, and staying on some cute hotel in the Art Deco district of Miami Beach. And so palm trees and undulating waves and the sand and all of that, I think, got into my mind's eye. And then I said I was going to keep it short. It's not so short.
That's fine with me.
like many in the time frame I was born, Vietnam was going on, and the troubles with Watergate and all of that, and it was beginning to make life sort of more troublesome and complicated and wondering, what to do. I did go to college briefly. I went to Northern Illinois University for my freshman year. And then, sort of following in my older sister's footsteps, I went to Hawaii my sophomore year, which was a small miracle to even be able to afford that one. My mom made it happen. She was so good to us. And at that point in time, if you weren't in college, there was a lottery system, a draft lottery system. And if you had a bad number, you could be easily called up to go to service in Vietnam. And some of the young people I went to grade school and high school with, came back from Vietnam in a wooden box. And I didn't think that the war was, I don't think that the reason for the war was just. But I stayed in school because that was the way to, maintain my relative freedom. Then the war ended, and I realized that I didn't know what I was doing in school. I mean, I enjoyed the reading and the hanging out and the culture and all of that. But I also knew that I was, I couldn't ask my mom for any more money. So I decided, well, what am I going to do for work? And I took a series of odd jobs, each seemingly worse than the other. Um, I covered a
Yep.
lot of this in my memoir. It was, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, certainly is the truth. Um, and, but I was kind of wondering. I was in some bands, and that didn't pay anything. Um, and then, I was working in factories, and I was working landscaping, and worked at a carnival for one summer, traveling from town to town. And I'm sure my mother wondered if I'd lost my marbles with that one. But I was just exploring life, just seeing what was out there, and still reading. Even though I was, let's say, in the carnival days, I'd still have my novels that I'd be reading, and I'd read them underneath the trucks when we weren't working, staying in the shade. And then I got a job as a hot tire roofer, and was working on a high school, helping to tar the roof, and hated the job, but it did pay me. I mean, it was a way to pay the rent. Was living in a farmhouse, kind of a crummy old farmhouse with about 6 or 7 other guys, 6 or 7, because somebody was always going somewhere. Somebody was hitchhiking to Denver. Somebody was hitchhiking to Alaska. Somebody was going somewhere. So the number seemed to rotate between 6 and 8. But I was one of those sort of the more. I was there for this period of time. And then one afternoon, a humongous rainstorm stopped the work on top of that high school roof. And everybody, you're up there on the roof, the lightning is real. Everybody went
Right.
running to their trucks and their cars. Down the ladder they went. Well, I didn't go to my car. I decided that I felt so happy in that water and that rain that I just rolled around in the grass of the football field of the high school, just loving the release of the smell of the tar and the grime and the heat. And in my rolling, I suddenly realized I had bumped into some human form, and it was my boss, who was glowering at me from above, because I was having a good time. And he said, "Van Aken, we don't need your kind around here." And I said, "Well, good. Fuck you. I don't need your kind either, man." And I went running to my, piece of shit $100 car, and got in. And I'm sopping wet by now. I got in and I drove about a half a mile before I realized that I was going to have to pay rent. My piece of the rent was coming up. So there was these newspapers that were not for the news, but for a way to look for a job, or maybe a boat or a lawnmower or something like that.
Classifieds.
Classifieds. There we go.
Yep. Yep.
And so, so I stopped and got one of those, and brought it into that house that I was renting with the other fellas, and spread it out on the kitchen table, and exotic dancers or plumbers or whatever, this kind of thing. But there was one that said short order cook needed, no experience necessary. And I circled that, went, well, wait a minute, no experience. I got that. I can do it.
Yep. Yep. Uh-huh.
So it was for a diner, and in the town that was just one over from where I was brought up, and maybe 10 miles from where I was living. And it was a diner that I actually went to as a kid with my grandmother, my mother, my family. And then later, even when I was working the carnival, we stopped in that diner and had a meal one day, much to the disappointment of a lot of the people around us because we were long hairs. Anyway, I hid my long hair underneath my high school sweater. I went in and applied for that job for, and the gentleman who was running the place came out. He's the cook, the head cook. I remember him wiping his hands, drying them off on his apron and coming up and looking at my resume and seeing nothing that had to do with the restaurant world. And he said, well, the ad said no experience necessary. I can see that that's true with you. But we need somebody. Can you be here tomorrow morning at 6:30 a.m.? You could be working breakfast. And I said, absolutely. And I went out and drove back to the rented house. And then I went 6:30 a.m. And then I went, wait a minute. I drove to the hardware store and bought an alarm clock. And yeah, smartphones weren't a thing yet.
No.
Not in the 70s. And so I started, and lo and behold, the jobs that I hated before that, the factory jobs, which there were 3 or 4 that were each awful, the roofing job, all the jobs I had, the clock never seemed to move. It never went from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. It just was always stuck in, you're still at work and you're hating it. Now it became different. Now I became engaged. And even though I was a long way from thinking I was going to be a chef, I did like the people I was working with, the language, the short order lingo, the smell of food, the satisfaction of seeing people, because there was one of the windows that was the pass that went from our kitchen to the counter of the diner, so I could see people having a good time, talking, laughing, playing the jukebox. And so something switched. I was looking at work in a different way. However, I had been to Key West once before, actually once before, and so I wasn't like, hey, where's my next cooking job, or I'm going to cooking school. My thinking was, how do I get enough money to go back to Key West? So I saved up $300, and me and a couple buddies got into a what's called a drive-away car, where a car dealership needs a car moved from one city to another, and they needed a car moved from Chicago to Miami. We didn't get paid. All we had to pay for was the gas. So we got in that car, and it was
Wow.
spring, and we drove down from Illinois. Um, I skipped one part. In the diner one day, the boss asked me to if I would work a party that was coming in for dinner, and I would only work lunch, breakfast, and lunch. And I said, "Will you pay me another dollar an hour?" And he said, "Yes." Those were negotiation skills I didn't normally possess. I don't know how I got that in my mind to do, but he said yes, so I said yes. And then the daytime floor staff left. They were mostly ladies who were 10, 20, 30 years older than me in some cases. And the nighttime crew came on. The nighttime front of the house staff came on, almost all female. I think all female. And one of them came into the kitchen, dropping off a dirty coffee cup, nearly taking the door off the hinges as she was moving with such velocity. And I was working with a buddy by then, and I looked at him and I said, "Who was that?" And it turned out to be the woman who became Justin's mother,
Janet, the infamous Janet.
the infamous Janet. So recircling back now, Janet, on her own and not with my wishes, decided at one point in the spring, before I had left for Key West, she decided that she was running away from home and going off with her girlfriends, probably to Arizona. Much to my argument, no, don't do that. Got to finish high school. But she had her own mind and decided she would do it. And so, just like 2 weeks before we were scheduled to take that driveway car, she split. And boy, I was catching hell back at work. Her parents thought I had put her up to it. Where is she? I didn't even hear from her for a bit until I got a postcard, and she was working at a motor lodge in Fort Lauderdale as a maid.
Wow.
So I talked to my friends, hey, let's stop in Fort Lauderdale and get a beer. Just drop me off at this motor lodge while you guys go get a beer. And they were like, we got to have this car into the dealership in Miami before they close at 9 o'clock. I go, fellas, it's 7:30. You got time. But I had no idea how to get a hold of her. There was no such thing as a cell phone or a pager. But I found a person dressed like a maid, and I asked her in my broken Spanish if she knew where Juanita might be. And she led me over to a room that was, the ceiling was like 5'3" in this room. And I went in there, she was. So I connected with her and said, yeah, let's take a walk. And we did. And walked along the ocean there, along the side of the ocean on the sidewalk. And I said, I'm going to go to Key West tonight, but I'll be in touch. And she was 17, Mark. So, she's a child almost. And I was 4 years old. And of course, 4 years between 17 and 21 is an ocean almost.
Right.
But there was something happening there. And I was like, I don't want to end this. So I got to Key West. The next day or two, I got a job offered for an all-night barbecue place, the Midget Bar and Grill. And they gave me the job saying, I said, I don't know how to cook barbecue. The boss said, don't worry about it, man. These guys would be so fucked up when you're cooking. They won't know the difference anyway, because it's working
great.
to 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shot. Anyway, I took my first check and I got her a Greyhound bus ticket, and I met her at the bus station about a week later, and we started living together in Key West. And but I mean, it was still actually a number of years cooking, because really that's only skill I really had, and that skill was marginal. Of course, I was just learning, and I had never been to school for it, and I never had some major chef or whatever to teach me things. So it was just catch as catch can. But it grew, and by 78, I had gotten a job in a restaurant at a hotel, and here was an atmosphere that was different. In this particular kitchen, they wanted to be chefs. Some of them had gone to school, some of them had worked in Europe, and I was suddenly around people who were had another language, another skill set, and I was entranced. I was like, I want to learn how to do that. So it shifted. So I was cooking almost 8 years before I really had this moment of knowing that I need to go buy a chef's knife. I didn't have a chef's knife before that. And I would carry that chef's knife in my bicycle basket and wrapped up in a side towel, for the next year and a half, until the next job came along. And that next job became the big changer for me. It became the place where I could see a future for me and Janet, because it was him and his wife. And it was a 38-seat restaurant, Key West. This is before Margaritaville. And Jimmy had just come to town. Jimmy got to town about 6 months after me. Not that we knew each other. We met each other, but we didn't know each other. Anyway, it was, those people who are listening that are in your audience, they're chefs or they're interested in all that. I think the important thing is to realize that they may look at my biography online and go, oh my God, this guy knew what he wanted to do when he was 4 years old.
Right. No,
I did not. And I didn't have any clue really until I'd been doing it for a while. And then I began to get totally serious and buy books and get self-educated and be educated by the people around me. Self-education's not a very apt term. You're never self-educated, unless you're locked up in solitary confinement, maybe, but you always have the opportunity to learn from the people around you. And my mom taught me to listen to the people around me. When I got a little further along, I remember getting jicama for the first time in the kitchen, delivered by the produce guy. And I read about it. I didn't know how to even pronounce it. I thought it was jicama.
Right.
And it came in with the apples, the oranges, the potatoes, and all that. And then the dishwasher, his name was Jaime from Mexico.
Right.
he lit up. He's like, "Oh, chef, jicama." And he goes, "Can I have a little piece?" And I cut him off a piece, and he got some lime, and he got some cayenne, and he was the first person that ate jicama in front of me. So he taught me a very interesting lesson about the values of how to eat jicama, and I use that as just a single illustration of the capacity for education and how it can come from so many different forms.
I'm actually really glad that you spoke on that, because the whole basis of the show and the listeners are maybe not so much for people who have had a lot of experience in the game, but more so for those who are interested in learning and seeing people who have done so many things like you have and be inspired by that. And it's funny that you're telling this whole story, because I finished your My Key West Kitchen 3 days ago, and man, I was hooked just on the story. It wasn't even just the recipes; it was the story of how you're telling your journey from Illinois all the way down to Key West. And now I'm hearing you telling the story, and all I can think about is all of the story that I read in the book. It's
Cool, man.
fantastic, chef. Fantastic. So now I'm reading. I'm halfway through your uh,
Yeah,
New
New World.
World Cuisine. This one is this one is fantastic, man. I love the you can tell the difference between
They're
the
different.
writing and the two. Very different. And
They are. They are. The New World Cuisine, of course, was written years before my Key West Kitchen, and I think of the difference between the books because now I've written six cookbooks, and it's much like albums for for bands, whatever. The progression is that when you write a book, you are given if you're contracted to write a book and you get by a publisher, you have an opportunity to teach yourself things you never knew before. So there are certain books like Key West Kitchen was so much fun to write because it was our lives, and Justin wrote it with me, and we'd lived in Key West, and it was an opportunity to celebrate that time and that time of discovery and that time of newness to Latin and Caribbean cooking. Um, the the New World Cuisine book, that was me wanting to show people I could cook on any at any level with any chef from any country. It's very chef driven, that book.
yes,
Not a book for mildly interested home cooks that maybe want to make dinner in 20 minutes. That is probably not your book. Key
no,
West Kitchen, definitely more so the case. And and at this point in time, if I know when I write the next book, if I do, cookbook, um, you reach a sort of level of not having to prove yourself to be complex. You reach a point where you're like, you're fine being, less showy, less, like Clapton when in his Cream days, just playing the hell out of that guitar at lightning
right.
speed,
Hmm.
compared to doing the acoustic version of Layla. There's a different approach.
Right. Right. And so I've been reading New World Cuisine, and what struck me is that it doesn't feel like you were trying to invent something new. It kind of feels like you were naming something that already existed, even though I can see where you're coming from when you say that the difference between the books trying to be more a little bit more complex. Um,
Yes.
at that particular moment in your life, were you consciously defining a philosophy, or were you simply just trying to make sense um, of what you were seeing and cooking around you at that time?
Defining a philosophy, sticking a flag in the ground and saying, I want to take you to this place called New World Cuisine, readers, cooks. I want you to see what I'm seeing, taste what I'm tasting, cook what I'm cooking. I wanted to take them to a thing that I don't think had found a voice before. There have been cookbooks written about Florida cuisine, of course, but this is the melding, this is the fusion that I began to really describe even before I wrote New World Cuisine, and that was based. That came out of a cook, not a book, a cookbook, but a book on sociology, anthropology that I had come across. Um, Fusion's a huge topic, but I was, and we can get into it. But no, I really wanted to. say, okay, there is an American cuisine that's California cuisine. There's a Southwestern cuisine. There's Hawaiian cuisine. But what I wanted to do was to showcase Florida and the American Southeast and going all the way down to the Caribbean and Central and South America to some extent, not to the level I did when I wrote a subsequent book because I had more to learn before I could write that book. But with that book, it was my breakout book regarding being much more focused on what does it mean to be a modern day cook cooking in a tropical place with a an interesting history of people coming from different places, the ingredients. I loved French cuisine. French cuisine was how I learned the the aristocratic kind of cooking that was available. But I felt like as an American, I needed to express my place on the globe too. And so learned so much from the methodology and the sauce making and the stock making and the techniques of French cuisine. But I began to utilize the ingredients that were native to where I'm living, and also to listen to the folk ways knowledge of the people, that it wasn't just a matter of laying Caribbean ingredients on top of French technique. That would be what when people talk about what do they call it, oh, bringing Caribbean cuisine to another level. What do they talk? Elevating it.
Elevating it.
That is nonsense to me. I mean, that's pejorative. That is an insult. Say, I'm going to elevate Caribbean cuisine. I think maybe people are not misguided or misintentioned when they say it, but there's nothing wrong with
Right.
homespun Caribbean cuisine that grandma has been making for hundreds of years. If you can improve on that, I don't think so. But,
Right.
but there is a difference, and which is that we bring our own experiences to the kitchen. And so, having learned how to make a sabayon, I wasn't stopped now by creating something called a mojo sabayon, which nobody had
Right.
done that I'd seen on the planet before. And I didn't do it because I wanted to be different from everybody else, because it just made sense to me from almost a melodic standpoint. The acidity of a mojo going into the richness of the eggs and the liaison, it just made sense in the same way that, a Frenchman might have gone a little wild and used blood oranges, right?
Right.
Some of my heroes, some of my French heroes like Verger, he traveled to Africa, and his cuisine became much more changed by his travels. Bocuse traveled to Japan, and they began to evolve too. And that's one of the things about cuisine is it never ending opportunity to learn and to be affected by the people and the flavors and the places that we go, whether it's even reading about places that we might wish to go, or going.
Right. And I've said this throughout my time as well, is it's just a constant evolution, right? You're always learning and intaking and tasting something new, and trying to incorporate that, whether directly or indirectly, but it's all an evolution, you know. I
And that,
appreciate.
that's why people go, "Don't you want to retire?" And I'm like, "Retire from the fun? Retire from the food?"
Right. Right.
No, I don't retire. I want to. Billy Joe Shaver song just came to mind. I want to live forever.
Yep. Yeah. Like Tom Brady says, it's not when they ask him which ring is his favorite, he always says the next one.
Bingo.
Yep.
Yeah. Right.
So my next question. So before the accolades and the recognition, what moments or places do you now recognize as the real turning points that shaped how you cook and think about food?
Well, even though I had no clue I'd be in the kitchen world when I was a child, um, my mom was a Girl Scout leader, and even when she wasn't doing that, she was she had learned of how to make to can tomatoes and put up preserves, and so my earliest memories of food are the times of shucking corn in the summer, shelling peas, helping her with the lids on the mason jars with my sisters, and making homemade strawberry jam. So very early on, I had a love of food and flavors of food. Even to I mean, I really didn't recognize it until years later.
Right.
I was in our restaurant in the office before we opened up, and email had just become a thing. And I got an email from someone I didn't recognize the name, and she says, "Hi, Chef Norman. You won't remember me, but my name is Debbie Hansen. I was your babysitter when you were 5 years old."
Wow.
I turned around because my office had like 6 or 7 other people who I worked with, and I'm like, "Is this the Twilight Zone or what's just happening here?" And she said, "I hope you don't mind if I tell you the story, but I was babysitting you one afternoon for you well, actually, you weren't there. You were out playing in the creek, and your sisters were at a friend's house, and but then you came home. I guess you'd gotten hungry, and I said, I've got your dinner ready." And I said, "Oh yeah," and I'm wearing. She said, "I'm wearing my swimming trunks and a Davy Crockett hat and some cowboy boots." I don't know. And so she said, "Yeah," and she brought over this paper plate with a hot dog on it, and I'm like, "Okay." And she goes, "You were furious." I'm like, "I was furious?" She goes, "You said to me, a hot dog's not a proper dinner," and you stomped out of the house.
I
I'm like,
love it.
now I'm like, this is impossible. This is crazy. I mean, I can't relate to this because I like hot dogs still.
Right.
Anyway, so it wasn't long after mom and dad came home. She's crying on the dining room table, head down on the table, crying. And then my dad said, "What happened?" "Norman was so upset because I made him a hot dog for dinner." So I, these are stories. The one story is the joy of making food with my family, my sisters, my mother, and my grandmother our maternal grandmother who came to live with us a little bit later. And then there's another story from of me. Oh, and my father said to the babysitter, "Oh, I'm sorry, Debbie. It's just that Norman has an unrealistic attitude when it comes to food, especially in the way it's presented." And I'm like,
Wow.
"Get the fuck out." I, I
That's
mean, I
awesome.
can't even imagine my father saying that. I mean, my memory of my father and food is him standing in front of the refrigerator, doors open, and he's eating a hot dog straight out of the package, not put.
I love it.
So, I mean, long before the accolades, that one. But I know even in the first job in the diner, just the satisfaction of making an omelet or flipping 2 eggs over and having them then not break, as you flip them and brought them back down to the pan properly. Those things added up before the accolades. But I'm going now forward in time, and that job where I was talking about where people were first starting to take, I mean, where I was around people that were taking it seriously. I was told that I needed to make the soup du jour, and following a recipe, I think from Pro Chef out of CIA, the big blue book that somebody had that had gone to CIA. I didn't because it was way too expensive to me consider. But I was making a potato leek soup, and all of a sudden the chef's like, "Van Aken dropped the soup. Come on over, help, get lunch out." And I'm like, "Oh my God, I had to leave the soup." And so came over to the lunch line, and we got pounded for about an hour and a half. And then I came back, and the soup was off the fire, but it sat there. And what had happened, Mark, was that the flavors had blossomed in ways that they wouldn't have had I just gone through the sequence of making it and made it in kind of a rush.
Right.
And the waiters, who were not the most likely people to compliment anyone, were like, "God damn, that soup's the best we've ever had. Who made the soup?" So I was like, soup. Yeah,
That's a
I
good
made
moment.
a good soup. I made a decent soup.
That's a great moment. I remember a quote in one of your books, because you've referenced the diner a couple of times, where you said, most people who cook something so many times, they end up hating it.
Mhm.
But for you, the eggs, you had done it so many times that it made you love it even more.
Yeah, I still like flipping an egg.
Yeah. That's awesome. And I feel like for kind of my audience, that's the type of I guess passion is the word, right? When you do something so much, it's easy to give up on it or hate it or disregard it. But really enjoying flipping that 4,000th egg, and still having that same I got it from egg 1 to egg 4,000 is it's that's what it takes to climb up the ladder as far as you've climbed up.
Yes. My culinary hero has become and has been for a long time Jacques Pepin, who we did this big campaign this year for his 90th birthday. The chef is 90 this year, just turned 90 in December. And I did two dinners, one in Orlando with 10 chefs that I ran, I curated, and then one in Miami with 6 chefs at another restaurant. Not my restaurant because I don't have one in Miami. But I got this amazing video from him and his daughter Claudine. But his book La Tech is one of his books. The book that affected me first was La Technique. But Jacques he's just such a soulful man, soulful chef, that he still does the videos in his home kitchen, and he's still showing people some of the most basic things that will make their lives easier and transform their cooking. He doesn't feel like he's got to make some sauce that nobody's ever heard of or will ever make. Um, I do feel, though, that a big part of my reason for becoming so curious and creating so many dishes was my attitude of not wanting to make the same dishes over and over again. I was afraid to be locked into having this very limited repertoire. So when I think of the limited repertoire, when I was working at the Pier House, which is the hotel where things began to break for me, it was making shrimp scampi over and over and over again, to where when I became the chef, which was not there, but a few years later, no, I am not going to put shrimp scampi
Shrimp
on the
scampi on
menu.
the menu,
I
right?
am going to do something with shrimp, and people hopefully are going to love it. But I needed to find ways to always push myself. So the tasting menus became a real opportunity for me to always push the envelope. The guests a lot of times don't want you to change the classic dishes, the signature dishes. And I have found for years now that even my own crew are they like making the same dishes over and over again, but I don't. When I'm home, though, um, the relaxation, the zen of making a grilled cheese sandwich is fine with me. Thomas Keller talks a lot about how one of his favorite things to do is wash the dishes. He'll
Yes.
just get into a mental zen space, just perfectly. I can just see Thomas too, just doing the most magnificent, articulate version of cleaning the dishes, drying the dishes, putting the dishes on the rack where they belong. Because I think you have to have that too. I think you have to have the appreciation for the most mundane, repetitious things as well. Perfectly filleting the fish, properly slicing the mushrooms.
Right. Right. Oh, that's great. And you're speaking of repetition in your restaurants now or in the past, do you often change the menu?
I would change it almost every day. If I remember talking to a very famous chef who will be left unnamed at this point in time because he's gotten in some hot water. But he said, Norman, I'm going to open up a restaurant with 12 seats. I'm going to cook whatever I want that day, that night, and I'm going to call the restaurant me.
Nice.
And
Nice.
there is, when the food trucks first started to come out and we saw the movie Chef, a lot of us were like, yeah, that's perfect. That's what I want to do. Just do my own food and change it all the time. But it's not a business model that's probably very workable. So you have to find a way to balance those passions with the realities of the business.
So so then with all of your experience and all the restaurants and everything, when you do rotate the menu, is it new dishes? Is it dishes that you've done in the past in like a catalog that you have? Or is it a mixture of both? Or is it a new rendition of old ones? Or how do you usually kind of package your new menus before you?
I'm very I'm very affected by the seasons. Let's see if this will work. Okay, right to the left. I just reached up and grabbed this. It was not. I didn't have this anywhere. Getting
That
ready
is
for
amazing.
this is cooking with the seasons. So when I'm looking to change the menu, I pretty much have this in handy, my the current menu handy, and then another thing, and it's over here. It started with a single, a single like little books like this that you put in your pocket.
Yes.
I began to call them my dream sheets. And what that is are the kind of what ifs, the half ideas. I've never done this dish before, but I'm interested in it. I'm keeping notes as I maybe I'm going through a cookbook or going through a market or reading a magazine on a plane or whatever. I'm keeping my dream sheets, which began with a little notebook like this and then expanded into, you know, you know, computer files, whatever. So I've got cooking with the seasons, current menu, dream sheets. That's the Venn diagram of the thing where that's my lift off. Generally speaking, I've written 6 books, so I've got so much repertoire that I could call on. But I would say that I barely ever go back to my own books and go, let's do that dish. My chefs might go back to a dish, a recipe in one of the books and go, chef, can we do that dish? We'd love the sound of that dish. Like, well, let's make it, see how it turns out.
And are all of the recipes and all of your cookbooks, were they on menus in the restaurants at one point in time? All of them?
No, I'll tell you a funny story. When I was asked to write, because I didn't presume to write a cookbook and think that I'd get published. I was cooking at Louis' Backyard, mid '80s. A guest came down from New York with her friend, her boyfriend, and ate at the restaurant. And without planning to, she came to the restaurant with him the next night and dined again. Didn't meet me. I was there. Didn't meet me. She went back to New York, where she was the vice president in charge of creative development for an offshoot of Random House. She wrote me a letter addressed to the restaurant. And Mark, I'll tell you, when I opened that letter up, it was unique for me to get mail at the restaurant, mail period.
Right.
But I opened up the mail and I'm like reading this. Dear Chef Van Aken, we were recently down in your restaurant, went there twice. I have 2 questions for you. Would you consider writing a cookbook for us? And have you kept your recipes over the years? I was astrally projecting at that moment, just lifted right off the ground, right through the roof, up into the sky, looking down at earth like I was up with the angels for a few minutes, thinking about my life just changed. I have been asked to do something I hadn't even dreamed that I'd be asked to do. And so I went home to our little rented house in Key West, and I had a blotter like on the desk, one of those big blotters. Usually people have, a calendar blotter. Mine was just graph paper because I like to write my dream sheet ideas down on it. And I took that blotter and that piece of paper and I began the top left-hand side. I just started writing the dishes that I had been doing until I got to the bottom right. And then I wrote what might be the introduction to the book. This all happened in a 3-hour period.
Oh, wow. And
so that became the template for A Feast of Sunlight. Some of the dishes were on the menu, but that was the last time I did it that way. But it was the repertoire that I had, and so that's where I began and where I needed to begin. And having never written a cookbook before, nor having been around anyone that had written a cookbook before, thank God I had a very good editor, and she became a dear friend and remains a dear friend, who guided me through the process. That was the book called Feast of Sunlight. Came out in hardcover, and we toured 18 cities across the United States. So for the first time, I'm traveling with Janet, visiting cities I'd never been to, going to the restaurants that I'd only read about in magazines before. So very transformative, very empowering, very uplifting, and it helped me learn a great deal because I was reading constantly about the restaurants in America, Food and Wine was magazine, Gourmet magazine, sitting either at the little desk that I had or on the porch outside, writing down ideas, underlining, highlighting, constantly trying. I didn't go to school. I had to make school. This was my way of making school.
Well, that wraps up part 1 of my conversation with Chef Norman Van Aken. In this episode, we explored the journey, right? From Illinois to Key West, the early lessons that shaped his career, and the experiences that eventually led to the creation of New World Cuisine. But we're only halfway through the story. This week, you get 2 parts to one story. And in part 2, we dive deeper into the philosophy behind the food, the chefs who helped shape an era of American cuisine, leadership in the kitchen, mentorship, hospitality, and the lessons Chef Norman believes every cook should carry forward into the future. So don't stop here. Part 2 is available right now, wherever you're listening to this episode. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to follow the show, leave a review, and share this episode with a chef, a cook, or a food lover who would appreciate hearing from one of the true pioneers of American cuisine. Until next time, keep learning, keep cooking, and keep pushing yourself to be better every day. Thanks, guys, for listening today. I'm Mark Grigsby, and I'll see you next time right here on the IncrEDIBLE Discourse.